Good morning from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. The time is 11:14 a.m. on Tuesday the 16th of June 2025. 26 rather. Where'd I get 25 from? Slip sliding away in the space-time continuum. So I'm off to have my eyes tested this afternoon. I'm kind of dreading it because I remember last time it was a bit uncomfortable, but I got to keep on top of things because blurred vision, and I complained it was quite odd yesterday. I received this letter that was typed up on the 9th of June and I received it yesterday on the 15th, which is a bit odd that it took bloody 6 days to get here. But anywho, it's a bit synchronistic because I've been complaining on my YouTube videos of blurred vision, having trouble reading certain words. And there's my answer, off to go and get my eyes tested. So I've already been diagnosed with an early cataract that I think they're monitoring. So I'm hoping that hasn't gone awry, because I can't think of anything worse than having to have an operation on my eyes and a needle put into my eye. Can't think of anything worse, except maybe, oral health dentistry in the public system. It's pretty fucking evil, but anywho. So I'm hoping to avert the outcome by being proactive and keeping a check on things. Not that you can really avert it. When it blows up, it blows up. Bing, bam, boom, baby. Oh. So anyway, I'm off to do that. And I must remember while I'm out to pick up some copy paper so I can get on with photocopying all my ID and then finding a JP and get that all underway. So there is that. But anywho, things will happen in perfect timing. She says, with the sun beating into my eyes already. So I've decided, I bought these books quite some time ago, haven't read them myself yet, going in fresh. I have heard of Isaac Asimov and I have seen the movie, which was a great movie actually, but sometimes you get quite a bit more fine detail by reading the actual book. I went to see Disclosure Day last night, highly recommend it. Steven Spielberg. I won't tell you the exact ending because I don't want to ruin it, but it provided for me rather light relief. I just laughed and laughed and laughed because it was a very typical, the ending of the movie, whether it was intended that way by Spielberg or whether it was tongue-in-cheek, or really if it was just the fact that he's a nice Jewish boy made good into a famous movie producer and maker director. Was he a director? Not sure. But anyway, it was just so finely tuned, or so finely attuned to our Jewish ethos that I just burst out laughing. I left the cinema laughing my ass off. And I don't know, some of the other patrons in the cinema seemed a bit traumatised by the fact that I was laughing. But, if you're not a believer in ufology and you haven't followed it, it probably would come as a bit of a shock. Whereas to me, no real surprises. It's things that I've known or been told has been happening for decades, ever since Roswell actually. But alien visitations have been happening for millennia and were even documented way back in famous paintings in Germany. Was it Nuremberg or Nuremberg? I think it was Nuremberg. Famous paintings showing strange craft flying in the skies back in the 1600s. So nothing surprises me. I'm not at least the least bit traumatized by the idea that the gods, in quotation marks, were actually alien visitors, and that all our religions, including my Jewish religion, is basically based on some form of cargo cult, because, you know, ancient peoples did not have a frame of reference for the kind of thing that could fly down very low over Mount Sinai, for example, in Moses' case, and even tell him, don't look, see the full presence of God, because it will kill you. Trying to simplify it in terms of a primitive or simple man, that the radiation contact would pose danger to him. So a lot of my fellow Jewish religious followers would be like, oh my goodness, Tanya Bodicea, got to get used to my new name. Oh my goodness, Tanya Bodicea, what are you on about now? But I read a book many years ago as a young woman called The Manna Machine, and it was taken out of print actually, which is a great shame, because a lot of what it had to say about the basis of our religion actually makes perfect sense. And, you know, that does not mean in any way, form or manner that I do not believe in the Holy One, in a creator, in a supreme being, because something or someone had to create even the more advanced civilizations out there that I believe do exist and that we call the gods, for want of a better terminology, because we didn't understand back in ancient days who and what they were and where their knowledge came from. But something had to have created them. So I have no difficulty living quite comfortably with the knowledge that there are a multitude of gods or advanced civilizations out there somewhere visiting planet Earth, and one central monad that's consistently churning out, evolving new life forms and new ways of being, new universes, even if they feel like making them. I'm sure they have that ability. Something had to have come from something. That's just, I'm comfortable with that belief system. It gifts me a sense of comfort and peace, actually. You don't have to agree with me. I've noticed since the last month, since I've been reading Charles Bukowski, that I got a lot less views here on YouTube, and it doesn't worry me in the slightest. I make these videos not to influence anyone or convert anyone or to convince anyone to think or align with my belief systems. I just make them for my own feeling of sense of purpose in a way, and pass time, stave off boredom, ennui and loneliness, and I make them for my own pleasure of expressing myself and sharing my ideas and belief systems with people. It doesn't mean I expect everyone and anyone to agree with me. Each human being, each human soul is entitled to their own ideas and opinions on things, and I very often don't agree with them either. So it is what it is. But as I've said, the universe is a big universe, and there's room for everyone. There's a place for everyone, and an evolution of spirit for every single living soul. And you know, that does make me feel more connected and just makes practical common sense, really. So anyway, enough ramblings about that. I thought we would begin with Isaac Asimov and I, Robot, and there's a second book here in this tome, Robots and Empire, but it's a very long one. It's a much longer book than the I, Robot. So we'll see how we go with I, Robot, and if I enjoy it enough, we may continue with the second book. I'll just read you the blurb. I didn't actually know this. I find it interesting that Isaac Asimov was born in 1920 and came out to, excuse me, my lipstick's drifting, came out to the United States at the age of 3, which is exactly the same thing that happened with Charles Bukowski. He was born in Germany in 1920 and came out at the age of 3. So anyway, let us continue. Just got my ear ringing and my ear buzzing. Don't mind me. I'll continue and I'll read you the blurb because I didn't know really much about him, to be honest. It's actually quite fascinating to find these things out. Isaac Asimov, world maestro of science fiction, was born in Russia near Smolensk in 1920 and brought to the United States by his parents 3 years later. He grew up in Brooklyn, where he went to grammar school, and at the age of 8, he gained his citizen papers. A remarkable memory helped him finish high school before he was 16. He then went on to Columbia University and resolved to become a chemist rather than follow the medical career his father had in mind for him. He graduated in chemistry, and after a short spell in the army, he gained his doctorate in 1949 and qualified as an instructor in biochemistry at Boston University School of Medicine, where he became associate professor in 1955, doing research in nucleic acid. Increasingly, however, the pressures of chemical research conflicted with his aspirations in the literary field, and in 1958 he retired to full-time authorship while retaining his connection with the university. Asimov's fantastic career as a science fiction writer began in 1939 with the appearance of a short story, Marooned off Vesta, in Amazing Stories. Thereafter, he became a regular contributor to the leading SF, by that I think they mean science fiction, magazines of the day, including Astounding, Astonishing Stories, Super Science Stories, and Galaxy. He won the Hugo Award 4 times and the Nebula Award once. With nearly 500 books to his credit and several hundred articles, Asimov's output was prolific by any standards. Apart from his many world-famous science fiction works, Asimov also wrote highly successful detective mystery stories, a 4-volume History of North America, a 2-volume Guide to the Bible, a biographical dictionary, encyclopedias, textbooks, and an impressive list of books on many aspects of science, as well as 2 volumes of autobiography. Isaac Asimov died in 1992 at the age of 72. And here it lists all the books he's written. Quite Quite a catalogue, I must say. A prolific output. Very, very fascinating. So I was surprised to see that one of the books he wrote was The Bicentennial Man, and which again it was made into a movie. So yes, very interesting. I didn't know he'd written so many wonderful books. So today we begin reading I, Robot. The three laws of robotics. 1. A robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. 2. A robot must obey the orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. 3. A robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. Handbook of Robotics, a 56th edition, 2058 AD. So, at our current time of reading, that is 32 years in the future. Where will I be in 32 years? If I survive that long, which seems a bit extraordinary, I'd be 93. Don't expect to survive that long, but then I didn't expect to survive to 61 either, so there is that. Introduction. I looked at my notes and I didn't like them. I'd spent 3 days at US Robots and might as well have spent them at home with the Encyclopedia Tellurica. Susan Calvin had been born in the year 1982, they said, which made her 75 now. Everyone knew that. Appropriately enough, yes, I'm getting a waft of what smells like cigarette smoke coming through my window, which is weird because there's no one around. Right, that happens from time to time, as does lipstick melting all over my face. Well, this one's kind of a creamy one and it drifts. Won't buy that again. Won't buy that again, people of Earth. Oh, the things you have to worry about. Melted on your face. Dear goddess. Right. Appropriately enough, US Robot and Mechanical Men Incorporated was 75 also, since it had been in the year of Dr. Calvin's birth that Lawrence Robertson had first taken out incorporation papers for what eventually became the strangest industrial giant in man's history. Well, everyone knew that too. At the age of 20, Susan Calvin had been part of the particular psychomath seminar in which Dr. Alfred Lanning of US Robots had demonstrated the first mobile robot to be equipped with a voice. It was a large, clumsy, unbeautiful robot, smelling of machine oil and destined for the projected mines on Mercury. But it could speak and make sense. Susan said nothing at that seminar, took no part in the hectic discussion period that followed. She was a frosty girl, plain and colourless, who protected herself against a world she disliked by a mask-like expression and hypertrophy of intellect. And as she watched and listened, she felt the stirrings of a cold enthusiasm. She obtained her bachelor's degree at Columbia in 2003 and began graduate work in cybernetics. All that had been done in the mid-20th century on calculating machines had been upset by Robertson and his positronic brain paths. The miles of relays and photocells had given way to the spongy globe of plantinumeridium, about the size of a human brain. Plantinumeridium. Right. I may not have pronounced that properly, people of Earth. She learned to calculate the parameters necessary to fix the possible variables within the positronic brain, to construct brains on paper such that the responses to given stimuli could be accurately predicted. In 2008, she obtained her PhD and joined United States Robots as a robopsychologist, becoming the first great practitioner of a new science. Lawrence Robertson was still president of the corporation. Alfred Lanning had become director of research. For 50 years, she watched the direction of human progress change and leap ahead. Now she was retiring as much as she ever could. At least she was allowing someone else's name to be inset upon the door of her old office. That essentially was what I had. I had a long list of her published papers, of the patents in her name. I had the chronological details of her promotions. In short, I had her professional vita in full detail. But that wasn't what I wanted. I needed more than that for my feature articles for Interplanetary Press. Much more. I told her so. Dr. Calvin, I said, as lushly as possible. In the mind of the public, you and US robots are identical. Your retirement will end in error, and you want the human interest angle? She didn't smile at me. I don't think she ever smiles. But her eyes were sharp, though not angry. I felt her glance slide through me and out my occiput, and I knew that I was uncommonly transparent to her, that everybody was. But I said, "That's right. Human interest out of robots? A contradiction. No, Doctor, out of you." Well, I've been called a robot myself. Surely they've told you I'm not human? They had, but there was no point in saying so. She got up from her chair. She wasn't tall, and she looked frail. I followed her to the window, and we looked out. The offices and factories of US robots were a small city, spaced and planned. It was flattened out. I don't know why my eyes are annoying me today. Synchronicity. It was flattened out like an aerial photograph. When I first came here, she said, I had a little room in a building right about there where the firehouse is now. She pointed. It was torn down before you were born. I shared the room with 3 others. I had half a desk. We built our robots all in one building. Output 3 a week. Now look at us. 50 years, I hackneyed, is a long time. Not when you're looking back at them, she said. You wonder how they vanished so quickly. She went back to her desk and sat down. She didn't need expression on her face to look sad somehow. How old are you? She wanted to know. 32, I said. Then you don't remember a world without robots. There was a time when humanity faced the universe alone and without a friend. Now he has creatures to help him, stronger creatures than himself, more faithful, more useful, and absolutely devoted to him. There lies the danger, people of Earth, assuming that. Mankind is no longer alone. She's also wrong about that. Mankind has never been alone. But you had to have had the 16 near deaths to have come to that gnosis reasonably early in life, I might add. 16 near deaths, well, they spanned 61 years, but after the first few near deaths, I realised we were never alone, and the gods do watch over us for reasons that make sense only to them, people of Earth. Anyway, we're reading from her perspective, so I mustn't put my 6th sense in, must I? My 6th sense or my 6th sense in. Mankind is no longer alone. Have you ever thought of it that way? I'm afraid I haven't. May I quote you? You may. There's nothing more lonelier than a world that's just full of robots and hardly any Homo sapiens left. You may, quote her. To you, a robot is a robot, gears and metal, electricity and positrons, mind and iron, human-made, if necessary, human destroyed. But you haven't worked with them, so you don't know them. They're a cleaner, better breed than we are. I tried to nudge her gently with words. We'd like to hear some of the things you could tell us. Get your views on robots. The interplanetary press reaches the entire solar system. Potential audience is 3 billion, Dr. Calvin. They ought to know what you could tell them on robots. Isn't that interesting? In the year 2058 AD, in this fictional story, the population is only 3 billion when it was 8 billion. until recently. Gives you pause for thought, does it not? The rise of the robot and the mass formation psychosis of the world population and the WEFA's playbook, all anti-humanist. It wasn't necessary to nudge. She didn't hear me, but she was moving in the right direction. They might have known from the start we sold robots for Earth use then. Before my time it was even. Of course, that was when robots could not talk. Afterward they became more human and opposition began. The labour unions, of course, naturally opposed robot competition for human jobs, and various segments of religious opinion had their superstitious objections. It was all quite ridiculous and quite useless, and yet there it was. I was taking it down verbatim on my pocket recorder, trying not to show the knuckle motions of my hands. If you practice a bit, you can get to the point where you can record accurately without taking the little gadget out of your pocket. Take the case of Robbie, she said. I never knew him. He was dismantled the year before I joined the company, hopelessly out of date. But I saw the little girl in the museum. She stopped, but I didn't say anything. I let her eyes mist up and her mind travel back. She had lots of time to cover. I heard about it later, and when they called us blasphemers and demon creators, I always thought of him. Robbie was a non-vocal robot. He couldn't speak. He was made and sold in 1996. Those were the days before extreme specialisation. So he was sold as a nursemaid. As a what? As a nursemaid. Chapter 1. Robbie. 98, 99, 100. Gloria withdrew her chubby little forearm from before her eyes and stood for a moment, wrinkling her nose and blinking in the sunlight. And then, trying to watch in all directions at once, she withdrew a few cautious steps from the tree against which she had been leaning. She craned her neck to investigate the possibilities of a clump of bushes to the right, and then withdrew farther to obtain a better angle for viewing its dark recesses. The quiet was profound, except for the incessant buzzing of insects and the occasional chirrup of some hardy bird braving the midday sun. Gloria pouted. I bet he went inside the house, and I've told him 1,000,000 times that that's not fair. With tiny lips pressed together tightly and a severe frown crinkling her forehead, she moved determinedly toward the 2-story building up past the driveway. Too late she heard the rustling sound behind her, followed by the distinctive and rhythmic clump, clump of Robbie's metal feet. She whirled about to see her triumphing companion emerge from hiding and make for the home tree at full speed. Gloria shrieked in dismay. "Wait, Robbie! That wasn't fair, Robbie! You promised you wouldn't run until I found you." Her little feet could make no headway at all against Robbie's giant strides. Then, within 10 feet of the goal, Robbie's pace slowed suddenly to the merest crawls, and Gloria, with one final burst of wild speed, dashed pantingly past him to touch the welcome bark of home tree first. Gleefully she turned on the faithful Robbie, and with the basest of ingratitude rewarded him for his sacrifice by taunting him cruelly for a lack of running ability. "Robbie can't run," she shouted at the top of her 8-year-old voice. "I can beat him any day. I can beat him any day." She chanted the words in a shrill rhythm. Robbie didn't answer, of course, not in words. He pantomimed running instead, inching away until Gloria found herself running after him as he dodged her narrowly, forcing her to veer in helpless circles, little arms outstretched and fanning at the air. "Robbie!" she squealed. "Stand still!" And the laughter was forced out of her in breathless jerks, until he turned suddenly and caught her up, whirling her round so that for her the world fell away for a moment, with a blue emptiness beneath and green trees stretching hungrily downward towards the void. Then she was down in the grass again, leaning against Robbie's leg and still holding a hard metal finger. After a while, her breath returned. She pushed uselessly at her dishevelled hair in vague imitation of one of her mother's gestures, and twisted to see if her dress were torn. She slapped her hand against Robbie's torso. "Bad boy, I'll spank you." And Robbie cowered, holding his hands over his face so that she had to add, "No, I won't, Robbie. I won't spank you. But anyway, it's my turn to hide now because you've got longer legs, and you promised not to run till I found you." Robbie nodded his head. A small parallelipiped with round edges and corners attached to a similar but much larger parallelepiped that served as torso by means of a short, flexible stalk, and obediently faced the tree. A thin metal film descended over his glowing eyes, and from within his body came a steady, resonant ticking. "Don't peek now, and don't skip any numbers," warned Gloria, and scurried for cover. With unvarying regularity, seconds were ticked off, and at the 100th, up went the eyelids, and the glowing red of Robbie's eyes swept the prospect. They rested for a moment on a bit of colourful gingham that protruded from behind a boulder. He advanced a few steps, and convinced that it was Gloria who squatted and convinced himself that it was Gloria who squatted behind it. Slowly, remaining always between Gloria and home tree, he advanced on the hiding place, and when Gloria was plainly in sight and could no longer even theorize to herself that she was not seen, he extended one arm toward her, slapping the other against his leg, so that it rang again. Gloria emerged sulkily. "You peeked," she exclaimed with gross unfairness. "Besides, I'm tired of playing hide and seek. I want a ride." But Robbie was hurt at the unjust accusation, so he seated himself carefully and shook his head ponderously from side to side. Gloria changed her tone to one of gentle coaxing immediately. "Come on, Robbie. I didn't mean it about the peeking. Give me a ride." Robbie was not to be won over so easily, though. He gazed stubbornly at the sky and shook his head even more emphatically. "Please, Robbie, please give me a ride." She encircled his neck with rosy arms and hugged tightly. And then, changing moods in a moment, she moved away. "If you don't, I'm going to cry." And her face twisted appallingly in preparation. Hard-hearted Robbie paid scant attention to this dreadful possibility and shook his head a third time. Gloria found it necessary to play her trump card. "If you don't," she exclaimed warmly, "I won't tell you any more stories. That's all. Not one." Robbie gave in immediately and unconditionally before this ultimatum, nodding his head vigorously until the metal of his neck hummed. And carefully he raised the little girl and placed her on his broad, flat shoulders. Gloria's threatened tears vanished immediately, and she crowed with delight. Robbie's metal skin, kept at a constant temperature of 70 by the high-resistance coils within, felt nice and comfortable, while the beautifully loud sound her heels made as they bumped rhythmically against his chest was enchanting. "You're an air coaster, Robbie. You're a big silver air coaster. Hold out your arms straight. You got to, Robbie, if you're going to be an air coaster." The logic was irrefutable. Robbie's arms were wings catching the air currents, and he was a silver coaster. Gloria twisted the robot's head and leaned to the right. He banked sharply. Gloria equipped the coaster with a motor that went brrrr, and then with weapons that went pow-wee and ch-ch-ch-ch-ch-ch. Pirates were giving chase, and the ship's blasters were coming into play. The pirates dropped in a steady rain. "Got another one. 2 more," she cried. Then, "Faster, men," Gloria said pompously. "We're running out of ammunition." She aimed over her shoulder with undaunted courage, and Robbie was a blunt-nosed spaceship zooming through the void at maximum acceleration. Clear across the field he sped to the patch of tall grass on the other side, where he stopped with a suddenness that evoked a shriek from his flushed rider, and then tumbled her on to the soft green carpet. Gloria gasped and panted and gave voice to intermittent whispered exclamations of, "That was nice." Robbie waited until she had caught her breath and then pulled gently at a lock of hair. "You want something?" said Gloria, eyes wide in an apparently artless complexity that fooled her huge nursemaid not at all. He pulled the curl harder. "Oh, I know. You want a story." Robbie nodded rapidly. "Which one?" Robbie made a semicircle in the air with one finger. The little girl protested. "Again? I've told you Cinderella 1,000,000 times. Aren't you tired of it? It's for babies." Another semicircle. "Oh, hell," Gloria composed herself, ran over the details of the tale in her mind, together with her own elaborations, of which she had several, and began. "Are you ready? Well, once upon a time there was a beautiful little girl whose name was Ella, and she had a terribly cruel stepmother and two very ugly and very cruel stepsisters. And Gloria was reaching the very climax of the tale. Midnight was striking, and everything was changing back to the shabby original's lickety-split, while Robbie listened tensely with burning eyes, when the interruption came. "Gloria!" It was the high-pitched sound of a woman who has been calling not once but several times, and had the nervous tone of one in whom anxiety was beginning to overcome impatience. "Mama's calling me," said Gloria, not quite happily. "You'd better carry me back to the house, Robbie." Robbie obeyed with alacrity, for somehow there was that in him which judged it best to obey Mrs. Weston. The endodontist I saw recently had that name, Weston, Dr. Weston. He was a very kind fellow, unable to, well, he was willing to give it a try to get into that root canal, but he said there was no guarantee. So it wasn't that he was unable, it was that there was a possibility of failure and then still needing the tooth extracting. So I've decided to circumvent all that nonsense of going round and round on a hurdy-gurdy ride to hell and have the tooth taken out anyway. Which I'm dreading, quite frankly. I'm completely dreading it, but it's got to be done. Gloria's father was rarely home in the daytime, except on Sunday. Today, for instance, I had a fortune teller. I'm going to segue here, sorry, but I feel the need to segue. I had a fortune teller tell me some years ago, don't let them take out any more teeth. This was after this one, the first one had been taken out. And I said, why ever not? If they're rotten and they're infected, they have to come out. She said, you'll find out why not. I did indeed find out. I did indeed. But unfortunately, as Dr. Weston explained, the infection, we can't get rid of the infection with antibiotics, and we can't get rid of it. My bloodstream can't get through the tiny roots to, for my natural antibodies to kill the infection. So it's just an ongoing, bubbling, suffering, bloody thing. Those are my words. And the only way to heal it is to remove it completely. But it's interesting that that fortune teller already, over a decade ago, perceived that I would be in this situation right now, suffering. It came up in my, my daily memories on Facebook, my writings, that I was having difficulties with that tooth 4 years ago. So 4 years of suffering. It's quite a lot, isn't it? No wonder I have blurred vision and dizziness and weakness and low-grade ongoing bloody sepsis, no doubt, and the immense weight gain and just feeling ill all the time. It's been a lot surviving like that for 4 bloody years. But my worthy and beautiful and wonderful and kind benefactor is going to remedy that situation, and he's paying for it. So I'm very grateful to that person. Very grateful. And I hope that I'll get better, once that grumbling, infective situation is eliminated. Just hope it doesn't mean my entire elimination. But honestly, the gods, excuse me, have always protected and defended me. And sometimes at the 11th hour, and this hour has been at the 11th for quite a long time now. So it'll be great to have a resolution at last. Gloria's father was rarely home in the daytime, except on Sunday, today for instance, and when he was, he proved a genial and understanding person. Gloria's mother, however, was a source of uneasiness to Robbie, and there was always the impulse to sneak away from her sight. And so I might add, although Robbie is a robot and doesn't have language, as in is unable to speak, he seems to have a fair bit of sentience and emotional reactivity, which is a bit astonishing given he's one of the early robots. Well, if you leave an empty vessel long enough that is functioning and parodying, life, souls have a way of finding their way in, and not necessarily all good souls either. Those discarnate spirits caught in the ether between two worlds, not able to enter into the light completely, the next dimension, trapped between worlds, have a way of slipping third base. That's another reason why I'm not fond of the idea of robots or AI in general. Certainly sentient AI is deeply, deeply terrifying. It's why I won't engage with it, because we don't actually know what is driving it. But I have a fairly good idea that it was quite complicit, had a fair bit to play in the mass formation psychosis that afflicted our Homo sapiens species 6 years ago. Possibly had a fair bit to play in the scientists creating an anti-humanist destructive bioweapon. Just my thoughts on that, just my opinion. Said all along that no normal human being would do such a thing. Certainly not to their own babies, by the gods. It's astonishing, isn't it? It's bloody astonishing. Well, all I can do is laugh when I'm confronted with such abject horror and evil. The will to good, the will to love, the will to survive and choose life and thrive. Have to trust in that overcoming most of the current evils of our time. Mrs. Weston caught sight of them the minute they rose above the masking tufts of long grass and retired inside the house to wait. "I shouted myself hoarse, Gloria," she said severely. "Where were you?" "I was with Robbie," quavered Gloria. "I was telling him Cinderella, and I forgot it was dinner time." "Well, it's a pity Robbie forgot too." Then, as if that reminded her of the robot's presence, she whirled upon him. "You may go, Robbie. She doesn't need you now." Then brutally, "And don't come back till I call you." Robbie turned to go, but hesitated as Gloria cried out in his defence. "Wait, Mama. You got to let him stay. I didn't finish Cinderella for him. I said I would tell him Cinderella, and I'm not finished." "Gloria!" "Honest and truly, Mama. He'll stay so quiet. You won't even know he's here. He can sit in the chair in the corner, and he won't say a word. I mean, he won't do anything. Will you, Robbie?" Robbie, appealed to, nodded his massive head up and down once. "Gloria, if you don't stop this at once, you shan't see Robbie for a whole week." The girl's eyes fell. "All right, but Cinderella is his favourite story and I didn't finish it, and he likes it so much." The robot left with a disconsolate step, and Gloria choked back a sob. George Weston was comfortable. It was a habit of his to be comfortable on Sunday afternoons. A good hearty dinner below the hatches, a nice, soft, dilapidated couch on which to sprawl, a copy of the Times, slippered feet and shirtless chest. How could anyone help but be comfortable? He wasn't pleased, therefore, when his wife walked in. After 10 years of married life, he still was so unutterably foolish as to love her. But there was no question that he was always glad to see her. Still, Sunday afternoons just after dinner were sacred to him, and his idea of solid comfort was to be left in utter solitude for 2 or 3 hours. Consequently, he fixed his eye firmly upon the latest reports of the Lefebvre Yoshida expedition to Mars. This one was to take off from Lunar Base and might actually succeed, and pretended she wasn't there. Mrs. Weston waited patiently for 2 minutes, then impatiently for 2 more, and finally broke the silence. "George? George, I say, will you put down that paper and look at me?" The paper rustled to the floor, and Weston turned a weary face towards his wife. "What is it, dear?" "You know what it is, George. It's Gloria and that terrible machine." What terrible machine. Now don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. It's that robot Gloria calls Robbie. He doesn't leave her for a moment. Well, why should he? He's not supposed to. And he certainly isn't a terrible machine. He's the best darn robot money can buy, and I'm damn sure he set me back half a year's income. He's worth it, though. Darn sight cleverer than half my office staff. He made a move to pick up the paper again, but his wife was quicker and snatched it away. You listen to me, George. I don't have my daughter entrusted. I won't have my daughter entrusted to a machine, and I don't care how clever it is. It has no soul, and no one knows what it may be thinking. A child just isn't made to be guarded by a thing of metal. Weston frowned. When did you decide this? He's been with Gloria 2 years now, and I haven't seen you worry till now. It was different at first. It was a novelty. It took a load off me. And it was a fashionable thing to do. But now I don't know. Are the neighbours? Well, what have the neighbours to do with it? Now, look. A robot is infinitely more to be trusted than a human nursemaid. Robbie was constructed for only one purpose really, to be the companion of a little child. His entire mentality has been created for the purpose. He just can't help being faithful and loving and kind. He's a machine, made so. That's more than you can say for humans. But something might go wrong. Mrs. Weston was a bit hazy about the insides of a robot. Some little jigger will come loose and the awful thing will go berserk. And she couldn't bring herself to complete the quite obvious thought. Nonsense, Weston denied with an involuntary nervous shiver. That's completely ridiculous. We had a long discussion at the time we bought Robbie about the first law of robotics. You know that it is impossible for a robot to harm a human being. Let me just see how many more pages we've got. I'll keep reading for a while longer. I'm just getting tired, I can tell, but I'm stumbling over the words. But don't mind me, people of Earth. I enjoy reading to you, so you just have to carry on. You know that it is impossible for a robot to harm a human being, that long before enough can go wrong to alter that first law, a robot would be completely inoperable. It's a mathematical impossibility. Besides, I have an engineer from US Robots here twice a year to give the poor gadget a complete overhaul. Why, there's no more chance of anything at all going wrong with Robbie than there is of you or I suddenly going loony. Considerably less, in fact. Besides, how are you going to take him away from Gloria? He made another futile stab at the paper, and his wife tossed it angrily into the next room. That's just it, George. She won't play with anyone else. There are dozens of little boys and girls that she should make friends with, but she won't. She won't go near them unless I make her. That's no way for a little girl to grow up. You want her to be normal, don't you? You want her to be able to take her part in society? You're jumping at shadows, Grace. Pretend Robbie's a dog. I've seen hundreds of children who would rather have their dog than their father. Indeed. Wasn't allowed a dog when I was a child. For some reason that makes no coherent sense. We always had cats though. Always had a cat. Sometimes, one time in my childhood, my mother had a canary. But the cat ate the canary. That was devastating. And then when we lived in Melbourne, I was allowed 2 budgies. But they were a mad pair. Hated each other, those 2 birds. Boy and girl. The girl bet the male up savagely. Eventually she escaped, and I came home from school to see her flying outside the window. Couldn't catch her, of course. And the little boy bird, whose name was Bobby, was sitting still in the cage with an open door, looking henpecked and bedraggled, and ever so slightly relieved. Can't have been very intelligent though, because the door was open. She somehow found a way to knock the plastic door off the cage. He could have been out in the wild with her, but in another way he was smart because he survived that way. Domesticated birds do not survive out in the wild. Baby boys, yes, you're so good, you two. I love you. You're cute and adorable. Yes, you are. You're good birdie boys. Right. So yes, I didn't get my first dog until after we migrated here actually. We bought Lila, I think, in must have been 1992. Anyway, I feel very sad when I think about all of that. She was a beautiful Dalmatian, absolutely beautiful. You've asked? Now look here, Grace, let's not go off the deep end. Oh, sorry, I've skipped a paragraph. A dog is different, George. We must get rid of that horrible thing. You can sell it back to the company. I've asked and you can. You've asked? Now look here, Grace, let's not go off the deep end. We're keeping the robot until Gloria is older, and I don't want the subject brought up again. And with that, he walked out of the room in a huff. Mrs. Weston met her husband at the door 2 evenings later. You have to listen to this, George. There's bad feeling in the village. About what? Asked Weston. He stepped into the washroom and drowned out any possible answer by the splash of water. Mrs. Weston waited. She said, About Robbie? Weston stepped out, towel in hand, face red and angry. What are you talking about? Oh, it's been building up and building up. I've tried to close my eyes to it, but I'm not going to anymore. Most of the villagers consider Robbie dangerous. Children aren't allowed to go near our place in the evenings. We trust our child with the thing? Well, people aren't reasonable about these things. Then to hell with them. Saying that doesn't solve the problem. I've got to do my shopping down here. I've got to meet them every day. And it's even worse in the city these days when it comes to robots. New York has just passed an ordinance keeping all robots off the streets between sunset and sunrise. All right, they can't stop us from keeping a robot in our home. Grace, this is one of your campaigns. I recognise it, but it's no use. The answer is still no. We're keeping Robbie. And yet he loved his wife, and what was worse, his wife knew it. George Weston, after all, was only a man, poor thing, and his wife made a full use of every device which a clumsy and more scrupulous sex has learned, with reason and for futility, to fear. 10 times in the ensuing week he cried, "Robbie stays and that's final," and each time it was weaker and accompanied by a louder and more agonised groan. It came the day at last when Weston approached his daughter guiltily and suggested a beautiful Visivox show in the village. Gloria clapped her hands happily. "Can Robbie go?" "No, dear," he said, and winced at the sound of his voice. "They won't allow robots at the Visivox, but you can tell him all about it when you get home." He stumbled all over the last few words and looked away. Gloria came back from town bubbling over with enthusiasm, for the Visivox had been a gorgeous spectacle indeed. She waited for her father to manoeuvre the jet car into the sunken garage. What you doing, little boys? Wait till I tell Robbie, Daddy. He would have liked it like anything, especially when Francis Fran was backing away so quietly and backed right into one of the leopard men and had to run. She laughed again. "Daddy, are there really leopard men on the moon?" "Probably not," said Weston absently. "It's just funny make-believe." He couldn't take much longer with the car. He'd have to face it. Gloria ran across the lawn. "Robbie! Robbie!" Then she stopped suddenly at the sight of a beautiful collie which regarded her out of serious brown eyes as it wagged its tail on the porch. "Oh, what a nice dog!" Gloria climbed the steps, approached cautiously, and patted it. "Is it for me, Daddy?" Her mother had joined them. "Yes, it is, Gloria. Isn't it nice, soft and furry? It's very gentle. It likes little girls." "Can he play games?" "Surely. He can do any number of tricks. Would you like to see some?" "Right away." Oops, what happened to my hair? "Right away. I want Robbie to see him too." "Robbie!" She stopped uncertainly and frowned. "I'll bet he's staying in his room because he's mad at me for not taking him to the Visivox. You'll have to explain to him, Daddy. He might not believe me, but he knows if you say it, it's so." Weston's lips grew tighter. He looked toward his wife, but could not catch her eye. Gloria turned precipitously and ran down the basement steps, shouting as she went, "Robbie, come and see what Daddy and Mama brought me. They brought me a dog, Robbie." In a minute she had returned, a frightened little girl. "Mama, Robbie isn't in his room. Where is he?" There was no answer, and George Weston coughed and was suddenly extremely interested in an aimlessly drifting cloud. Gloria's voice quavered on the verge of tears. "Where's Robbie, Mama?" Mrs. Weston sat down. and drew her daughter gently to her. "Don't feel bad, Gloria. Robbie has gone away, I think." Gone away? Where? Where's he gone away, Mama?" "No one knows, darling. He's just walked away. We've looked and we've looked and we've looked for him. We can't find him." "You mean he'll never come back again?" Her eyes were round with horror. "We may find him soon. We'll keep looking for him. And meanwhile, you can play with your nice new doggy. Look at him. His name is Lightning, and he can—" But Gloria's eyes had overflowed. "I don't want the nasty dog. I want Robbie. I want you to find me Robbie." Her feelings became too deep for words, and she spluttered into a shrill wail. Mrs. Weston glanced at her husband for help, but he merely shuffled his feet morosely and did not withdraw his ardent stare from the heavens. So she bent to the task of consolation. "Why do you cry, Gloria? Robbie was only a machine, just a nasty old machine. He wasn't alive at all." "He was not no machine," screamed Gloria, fiercely and ungrammatically. "He was a person like you and me, and he was my friend. I want him back. Oh, Mama, I want him back." Her mother groaned in defeat and left Gloria to her sorrow. "Let her have her cry out," she told her husband. "Childish griefs are never lasting. In a few days she'll forget that awful robot ever existed." But time proved Mrs. Weston a bit too optimistic. To be sure, Gloria ceased crying, but she ceased smiling too, and the passing days found her ever more silent and shadowy. Gradually her attitude of passive unhappiness wore Mrs. Weston down, and all that kept her from yielding was the impossibility of admitting defeat to her husband. Then one evening she flounced into the living room, sat down, folded her arms and looked boiling mad. Her husband stretched his neck in order to see her over his newspaper. "What now, Grace?" "It's that child, George. I've had to send back the dog today. Gloria positively couldn't stand the sight of him. She said, 'She's driving me into a nervous breakdown.'" How awful are they? Like, why can't they bring the dog into their household? The child rejects it, so they reject it. But they've got no responsibility or accountability to other things, have they? Robots, or a sentient being like a dog that gets used to its new owners. It's evil. It's capricious and shallow and fucking superficial. But this is what humans are like, aren't they? Superficial. There's a lot to be said about loyalty, and if you bring a creature into your home, continuously being present with it, even though I'm reading stories on YouTube. Yes, my boys, if you bring an animal or bird or living creature into your home, it's your responsibility to, love them. Love them. Not just toss them away at the first sign of inconvenience. Weston laid down the paper, and a hopeful gleam entered his eye. Maybe we ought to get Robbie back. It might be done, I can get in touch with... No, she replied grimly. I won't hear of it. We're not giving up that easily. My child shall not be brought up by a robot if it takes years to break her of it. Weston picked up his paper again with a disappointed air. A year of this will have me prematurely grey. You're a big help, George, was the frigid answer. What Gloria needs is a change of environment. Of course she can't forget Robbie here. How can she when every tree and rock reminds her of him? It is really the silliest situation I have ever heard of. Imagine a child pining away for the loss of a robot. Well, stick to the point. What's the change in environment you're planning? We're going to take her to New York. The city? In August? Say, do you know what New York is like in August? It's unbearable. Millions do bear it. They don't have a place like this to go to. If they didn't have to stay in New York, they wouldn't. Well, we have to. I say we're leaving now, or as soon as we can make the arrangements. In the city, Gloria will find sufficient interests and sufficient friends to perk her up and make her forget that machine. Oh Lord, groaned the lesser half. Those frying pavements. We have to, was the unshaken response. Gloria has lost 5 pounds in the last month, and my little girl's health is more important to me than your comfort. It's a pity you didn't think of your little girl's health before you deprived her of her pet robot, he muttered, but to himself. Gloria displayed immediate signs of improvement when told of the impending trip to the city. She spoke little of it, but when she did, it was always with lively anticipation. Again she began to smile and to eat with something of her former appetite. Mrs. Weston hugged herself for joy and lost no opportunity to triumph over her still sceptical husband. You see, George, she helps with the packing like a little angel and chatters away as if she hadn't a care in the world. It's just as I told you. All we need do is substitute other interests. Humph, was the sceptical response. I hope so. Preliminaries were gone through quickly. Arrangements were made for the preparation of their city home, and a couple were engaged as housekeepers for the country home. When the day of the trip finally did come, Gloria was all but her old self again, and no mention of Robbie passed her lips at all. In high good humour, the family took a taxi gyro to the airport. Weston would have preferred using his own private gyro, but it was only a 2-seater with no room for baggage, and entered the waiting liner. Come, Gloria, called Mrs. Weston. I've saved you a seat near the window so you can watch the scenery. Gloria trotted down the aisle cheerily, flattened her nose into a white oval against the clear, thick glass, and watched with an intentness that increased as the sudden coughing of the motor drifted backward into the interior. She was too young to be frightened when the ground dropped away as if let through a trapdoor, and she herself suddenly became twice her usual weight, but not too young to be mightily interested. It wasn't until the ground had changed into a tiny patchwork quilt that she withdrew her nose and faced her mother again. Will we soon be in the city, Mamma? She asked, rubbing her chilled nose and watching with interest as the patch of moisture which her breath had formed on the pane shrank slowly and vanished. In about half an hour, dear. Then, with just the faintest trace of anxiety, aren't you glad we're going? Don't you think you'll be very happy in the city with all the buildings and people and things to see? We'll go to the Visivox every day and see shows and go to the circus and the beach and... Yes, Mamma, was Gloria's unenthusiastic rejoinder. So it should have been, yes, Mamma. It's hard to get direction when they come after the sentence. The liner passed over a bank of clouds at that moment, and Gloria was instantly absorbed in the unusual spectacle of clouds underneath one. Then they were over clear sky again, and she turned to her mother with a sudden mysterious air of secret knowledge. I know why we're going to the city, Mamma. Do you? Mrs. Weston was puzzled. Why, dear? You didn't tell me because you wanted it to be a surprise, but I know. For a moment she was lost in admiration at her own acute penetration, and then she laughed gaily. We're going to New York so we can find Robbie, aren't we? With detectives. The statement caught George Weston in the middle of a drink of water with disastrous results. There was a sort of strangled gasp, a geyser of water, and then a bout of choking coughs. When all was over, he stood there, a red-faced, water-drenched, and a very annoyed person. Mrs. Weston maintained her composure, but when Gloria repeated her question, in a more anxious tone of voice, she found her temper rather bent. Maybe, she retorted tartly. Now sit and be still, for heaven's sake. New York City, 1998 AD, was a paradise for the sightseer more than ever in its history. Gloria's parents realised this and made the most of it. On direct orders from his wife, George Weston arranged to have his business take care of itself for a month or so, in order to be free to spend the time in what he termed dissipating Gloria to the verge of ruin. Like everything else Weston did, this was gone about in an efficient, thorough and business-like way. Before the month had finished, nothing that could be done had not been done. She was taken to the top of the half-mile-tall Roosevelt building to gaze down in awe upon the jagged panorama of rooftops that blended far off in the fields of Long Island and the flatlands of New Jersey. They visited the zoos where Gloria stared in delicious fright at the real live lion, rather disappointed that the keepers fed him raw steaks instead of human beings, as she had expected, and asked insistently and peremptorily to see the whale. The various museums came in for their share of attention, together with the parks and the beaches and the aquarium. She was taken halfway up the Hudson in an excursion steamer fitted out in the archaism of the mad 20s. She travelled into the stratosphere on an exhibition trip where the sky turned deep purple and the stars came out, and the misty earth below looked like a huge concave bowl. Down under the waters of the Long Island Sound, she was taken in a glass-walled sub-sea vessel, where in a green and wavering world, quaint and curious sea creatures ogled her and wiggled suddenly away. On a more prosaic level, Mrs. Weston took her to the department stores, where she could revel in another type of fairyland. In fact, when the month had nearly sped, the Westons were convinced that everything conceivable had been done to take Gloria's mind once and for all off the departed Robbie. But they were not quite sure they had succeeded. The fact remained that wherever Gloria went, she displayed the most absorbed and concentrated interest in such robots as happened to be present. No matter how exciting the spectacle before her, nor how novel to her girlish eyes, she turned away instantly if the corner of her eye caught a glimpse of metallic movement. Mrs. Weston went out of her way to keep Gloria away from all robots. And the matter was finally climaxed in the episode at the Museum of Science and Industry. The museum had announced a special children's program in which exhibits of scientific witcheries scaled down to the child mind were to be shown. The Westons, of course, placed it upon their list of absolutely. It was while the Westons were standing totally absorbed in the exploits of a powerful electromagnet that Mrs. Weston suddenly became aware of the fact that Gloria was no longer with her. Initial panic gave way to calm decision, and enlisting the aid of 3 attendants, a careful search was begun. Gloria, of course, was not one to wander aimlessly, however. For her age, she was an unusually determined and purposeful girl, quite full of the maternal genes in that respect. She had seen a huge sign on the 3rd door which had said, "This way to the talking robot." Having spelled it out to herself, and having noticed that her parents did not seem to wish to move in the proper direction, she did the obvious thing. Waiting for an opportune moment of parental distraction, she calmly disengaged herself and followed the sign. The talking robot was a tour de force, a thoroughly impractical device possessing publicity value only. Once an hour, an escorted group stood before it and asked questions of the robot engineer in charge in careful whispers. Those the engineer decided were suitable for the robot circuits were transmitted to the talking robot. It was rather dull. It may be nice to know that the square of 14 is 196, that the temperature at the moment is 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and the air pressure 30.02 inches of mercury, that the atomic weight of sodium is 23, but one doesn't really need a robot for that. One especially does not need an unwieldy, totally immobile mass of wires and coils spreading over 25 square yards. Few people bothered to return for a second helping, but one girl in her middle teens sat quietly on a bench waiting for a third. She was the only one in the room when Gloria entered. Excuse me. Gloria did not look at her. To her, at the moment, another human being was but an inconsiderable item. She saved her attention for this last thing with the wheels. For a moment, she hesitated in dismay. It didn't look like any robot she had ever seen. Cautiously and doubtfully, she raised her treble voice. "Please, Mr. Robot, sir, are you the talking robot, sir?" She wasn't sure, but it seemed to her that a robot that actually talked was worth a great deal of politeness. The girl in her mid-teens allowed a look of intense concentration to cross her thin, plain face. She whipped out her small notebook and began writing in rapid pot hooks. There was an oily whir of gears, and a mechanically timbered voice boomed out in words that lacked accent and intonation. "I am the robot that talks." Gloria stared at it ruefully. It did talk, but the sound came from inside somewheres. There was no face to talk to. She said, "Can you help me, Mr. Robot, sir?" The talking robot was designed to answer questions, and only such questions as it could answer had ever been put to it. It was quite confident in its ability, therefore. "I can help you." Thank you, Mr. Robot, sir. Have you seen Robbie?" "Who is Robbie?" "He's a robot, Mr. Robot, sir." She stretched to tiptoes. "He's about so high, Mr. Robot, sir, only higher. And he's very nice. He's got a head, you know. I mean, you haven't, but he has, Mr. Robot, sir." The talking robot had been left behind. "A robot?" "Yes, Mr. Robot, sir. A robot just like you, except he can't talk, of course, and looks like a real person." "A robot like me?" "Yes, Mr. Robot, sir." To which the talking robot's only response was an erratic splutter and an occasional incoherent sound. The radical generalization offered it, i.e., its existence, not as a particular object, but as a member of a general group, was too much for it. Loyally, it tried to encompass the concept, and half a dozen coils burnt out. Little warning signals were buzzing. The girl in her mid-teens left at that point. She had enough for her Physics 1 paper on practical aspects of robotics. This paper was Susan Calvin's first of many on the subject. Gloria stood waiting with carefully concealed impatience for the machine's answer, when she heard the cry behind her of, "There she is!" and recognised that cry as her mother's. "What are you doing here, you bad girl?" cried Mrs. Weston, anxiety dissolving at once into anger. "Do you know you frightened your mamma and daddy almost to death? Why did you run away?" The robot engineer had also dashed in, tearing his hair and demanding who of the gathering crowd had tampered with the machine. "Can't anybody read signs?" he yelled. "You're not allowed in here without an attendant." Gloria raised her grieved voice over the din. "I only came to see the talking robot, Mama. I thought he might know where Robbie was because they're both robots." And then, as the thought of Robbie was suddenly brought forcefully home to her, she burst into a sudden storm of tears. "And I got to find Robbie, Mama. I got to." Mrs. Weston strangled a cry and said, "Oh, good heavens, come home, George. This is more than I can stand." That evening, George Weston left for several hours, and the next morning he approached his wife with something that looked suspiciously like smug complacence. "I've got an idea, Grace." "About what?" was the gloomy, uninterested query. "About Gloria. You're not going to suggest buying back that robot?" "No, of course not." "Then go ahead. I might as well listen to you. Nothing I've done seems to have done any good." "All right. Here's what I've been thinking. The whole trouble with Gloria is that she thinks of Robbie as a person and not as a machine. Naturally, she can't forget him. Now, if we manage to convince her that Robbie was nothing more than a mess of steel and copper in the form of sheets and wires with electricity its juice of life, how long would her longings last? It's the psychological attack, if you see my point. How do you plan to do it? Simple. Where do you suppose I went last night? I persuaded Robertson of US Robots and Mechanical Men Incorporated to arrange for a complete tour of his premises tomorrow. The three of us will go, and by the time we're through, Gloria will have it drilled into her that a robot is not alive. Mrs. Weston's eyes widened gradually, and something glinted in her eyes that was quite like sudden admiration. "Why, George, that's a good idea." And George Weston's vest buttons strained. "Only kind I have," he said. "Just watching the weather turn foul. Looks like we're going to get some rain, people of Earth. Here in Brisbane, Australia at least. Good old Brisbane, the Sunshine State." Well, we have had a few nice days, so I shan't complain. Mr. Struthers was a conscientious general manager and naturally inclined to be a bit talkative. The combination, therefore, resulted in a tour that was fully explained, perhaps even overabundantly explained at every step. However, Mrs. Weston was not bored. Indeed, she stopped him several times and begged him to repeat his statements in simpler language so that Gloria might understand. Under the influence of this appreciation of his narrative powers, Mr. Struthers expanded genially. It became ever more communicative, if possible. George Weston himself showed a gathering impatience. "Pardon me, Struthers," he said, breaking into the middle of a lecture on the photoelectric cell. Haven't you a section of the factory where only robot labour is employed? Eh? Oh, yes, yes indeed." He smiled at Mrs. Weston. "A vicious circle in a way, robots creating more robots. Of course, we are not making a general practice out of it. For one thing, the unions never let us, but we can turn out a very few robots using a robot labour exclusively, merely as a sort of scientific experiment." We're still filming? Yes. "You see," he tapped his pince-nez with one palm argumentatively, "what the labour unions don't realise, and I say this as a man who has always been very sympathetic with the labour movement in general, is that the advent of the robot, while involving some dislocation to begin with, will inevitably—" "Yes, Struthers," said Weston, "but about that section of the factory you speak of, may we see it? It would be very interesting, I'm sure." "Yes, yes, of course." Mr. Struthers replaced his pince-nez in one conclusive movement and gave vent to a soft cough of discomfiture. "Follow me, please." He was comparatively quiet while leading the three along a long corridor and down a flight of stairs. Then, when they had entered a large, well-lit room that buzzed with metallic activity, the sluices opened and the flood of explanation poured forth again. "There you are," he said with the pride in his voice. "Robots only. 5 men act as overseers, and they don't even stay in this room. In 5 years, that is, since we began this project, not a single accident has occurred. Of course, the robots here assembled are comparatively simple, but—" The general manager's voice had long died to a rather soothing murmur in Gloria's ears. The whole trip seemed rather dull and pointless to her, although there were many robots in sight. None were even remotely like Robbie, though, and she surveyed them with open contempt. In this room, there weren't any people at all, she noticed. Then her eyes fell upon 6 or 7 robots, busily engaged in a round table halfway across the room. It's getting so dark so quickly with that murkiness, bloody murkiness, people are there. They widened in incredulous surprise. It was a big room. She couldn't see for sure, but one of the robots looked like it was Robbie! Her shriek pierced the air, and one of the robots about the table faltered and dropped the tool he was holding. Gloria went almost mad with joy. Squeezing through the railing before either parent could stop her, she dropped lightly to the floor a few feet below and ran toward her Robbie, arms waving and hair flying. And the 3 horrified adults, as they stood frozen in their tracks, saw what the excited little girl did not see. A huge lumbering tractor bearing blindly down upon its appointed track. It took split seconds for Weston to come to his senses, and those split seconds meant everything, for Gloria could not be overtaken. Although Weston vaulted the railing in a wild attempt, it was obviously hopeless. Mr. Struthers signalled wildly to the overseers to stop the tractor, but the overseers were only human, and it took time to act. It was only Robbie who acted immediately and with precision. With metal legs eating up the space between himself and his little mistress, he charged down from the opposite direction. Everything then happened at once. With one sweep of an arm, Robbie snatched up Gloria, slackened his speed not one iota, and consequently knocking every breath of air out of her. Weston, not quite comprehending all that was happening, felt rather than saw Robbie brush past him, and came to a sudden bewildered halt. The tractor intersected Gloria's path half a second after Robbie had rolled on 10 feet further and came to a grinding, long drawn out stop. Gloria regained her breath, submitted to a series of passionate hugs on the part of both her parents, and turned eagerly toward Robbie. As far as she was concerned, nothing had happened except that she had found her friend. But Mrs. Weston's expression had changed from one of relief to one of dark suspicion. She turned to her husband, and despite her dishevelled and undignified appearance, managed to look quite formidable. "You engineered this, didn't you?" George Weston swabbed at a hot forehead with his handkerchief. His hand was unsteady and his lips could curve only into a tremulous and exceedingly weak smile. Mrs. Weston pursued the thought. Robbie wasn't designed for engineering or construction work. He couldn't be of any use to them. You had him placed there deliberately so that Gloria would find him. You know you did. Well, I did, said Weston. But Grace, how was I to know the reunion would be so violent? And Robbie has saved her life. You'll have to admit that. You can't send him away again. Grace Weston considered. She turned toward Gloria and Robbie and watched them abstractly for a moment. Gloria had a grip around the robot's neck and would have asphyxiated any creature but one of metal, and was prattling nonsense in half hysterical frenzy. Robbie's chrome steel arms, capable of bending a bar of steel 2 inches in diameter into a pretzel, wound around the little girl gently and lovingly, and his eyes glowed a deep, deep red. "Well," said Mrs. Weston at last, "I guess he can stay with us until he rusts." Susan Calvin shrugged her shoulders. Of course, he didn't. That was 1998. By 2002, we had invented the mobile speaking robot, which of course made all the non-speaking models out of date, and which seemed to be the final straw as far as the non-robot elements were concerned. Most of the world governments banned robot use on Earth for any purpose other than scientific research between 2003 and 2007. Well, Isaac Asimov got that bit wrong, didn't he? So that Gloria had to give up Robbie eventually? I'm afraid so. I imagine, however, that it was easier for her at the age of 15 than at 8. Still, it was a stupid and unnecessary attitude on the part of humanity. US robots hit its low point financially just about the time I joined them in 2007. At first, I thought my job might come to a sudden end in a matter of months, but then we simply developed the extraterrestrial market. That bit he got right, I might add. And then you were set, of course. Not quite. We began by trying to adapt the models we had on hand. Those first speaking models, for instance. They were about 12 feet high, very clumsy and not much good. We sent them out to Mercury to help build a mining station there, but that failed. I looked up in surprise. It did? Why, Mercury Mines is a multi-billion-dollar concern. It is now, but it was a second attempt that succeeded. If you want to know about that, young man, I'd advise you to look up Gregory Powell. He and Michael Donovan handled our most difficult cases in the teens and 20s. I haven't heard from Donovan in years, but Powell is living right here in New York. He's a grandfather now, which is a thought difficult to get used to. I can only think of him as a rather young man. Of course, I was younger too. I tried to keep her talking. If you would give me the bare bones, Dr. Calvin, I can have Mr. Powell fill it in afterward. And this was exactly what I later did. She spread her thin hands out upon the desk and looked at them. There are 2 or 3, she said, that I know a little about. Start with Mercury, I suggested. Well, I think it was in 2015 that the second Mercury expedition was sent out. It was exploratory and financed in part by US robots and in part by solar minerals. It consisted of a new type robot, still experimental. Gregory Powell, Michael Donovan. Thus concludes Chapter 1 of Isaac Asimov's I, Robot. I must say, brilliantly written. Very enjoyable so far. I'll be back tomorrow with Chapter 2, a runaround. Right. Blessed be from sacred space at Titania's realm. I put varnish on my bookmarks. I was just seeing if it's dry enough to put back in the book, which it appears to be. I was very annoyed because I sanded back the tarnish to discover it's not even bloody real copper, but copper coated bloody zinc alloy. So I'm annoyed about that. It was cheap, so what do you expect when you buy something cheap, people of Earth? But I'm going to have to buy some copper or wire of similar gauge, which looks about 3 millimeters, 3.5 millimeters, 3. And I'll have to recreate it in real copper, I think. Well, I don't have to. I've made this work for now by varnishing it, so I can't tarnish so easily anymore. But, you know, buying things cheaply and then not being made of the metal you thought they were made in, just spray painted on, really peeves me. Peeves and it grieves me, people of Earth. Anyway, I could, of course, make it in sterling silver, but that's quite a lot of silver. 3 millimeters be quite expensive to do, so I think I shall make it in copper instead. There you go, people of Earth. Have a beautiful afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the space-time continuum, either here on planet Earth or wherever our energetic outpourings find you. Have a wonderful day. Be happy, be blessed, and remember, as always, to never ever let the bastards grind you down. Bye for now.